On the morning of April 24th, 2016, the surface of the Hutuo River was almost perfectly still. 3 days earlier, the banks had been crowded. Families gathered with plastic buckets. Fishes splashed into the shallows. Turtles slipped from trembling hands. Thin yellow prayer papers drifted between empty bottles and plastic bags. It was a ritual of mercy, a ceremony meant to give life back to the water. But by Sunday morning, the ceremony was gone. Only the debris remained. The river had resumed its quiet indifference. At around 7 a.m., a sanitation worker moved slowly along the concrete embankment near the outskirts of Shijiazhuang in Hebei. Post-festival cleanup was routine. He had done this many times before, collecting leftover offerings, fishing out plastic waste tangled along the bridge supports. There was nothing unusual about that morning, until he noticed something pale drifting just a few meters from shore. At first glance, it looked like discarded meat, swollen, softened by water. That wasn't uncommon. During festival days, raw offerings were sometimes thrown into the river as symbolic sacrifice. He extended his long-handled net and pulled it closer. It felt heavier than expected. The object rolled slightly as it lifted from the water, turning just enough for light to catch its curve. There are moments when the brain refuses to process what the eyes are seeing. The texture was wrong. Too smooth, too structured. This was not animal flesh. It was shaped like part of a leg, a human leg. The net slipped from his hands. Within the hour, the riverside was sealed off with police tape. Patrol vehicles lined the road. Officers in gloves combed the shoreline, while a dive team prepared to enter the shallows. Onlookers gathered at a distance, whispering, the rumors spreading faster than the current ever could. The first discovery did not remain alone for long. Divers began recovering more pieces. Not one, not two, but nearly 20 separate sections, all contained within 5 black plastic bags, tied loosely, no rocks, no weights, nothing to ensure they would remain hidden beneath the surface. It was almost as if whoever disposed of them expected the river to do the work quietly, or didn't have time to finish. Each section appeared deliberately cut, separated at the joints, not hacked randomly. This was not a frenzy. The cuts were controlled, anatomical, intentional. Someone had taken their time. But as forensic teams began cataloging the remains, something else became clear. The parts did not complete a whole. 2 hands were missing. Part of the thigh was unaccounted for. Several internal organs were gone. If the purpose was concealment, why leave it incomplete? Why only 5 bags? Why not 6? For the next 3 days, divers combed every meter of riverbed. The water level was low that week. Visibility was manageable. If additional bags had been thrown in, they should have surfaced. None did. That absence raised 2 possibilities. Either the killer had intentionally kept certain parts, or he had been interrupted. And if interrupted, by whom? 3 days before the body parts were discovered, during the peak of the animal release ceremony, a man had been fishing from a small boat downstream. Not for prayer, for profit. Released animals often drifted toward the lower current, where some individuals quietly retrieved them for resale. From roughly 100 meters away, he noticed a middle-aged man standing on the embankment. The man was not participating in the ceremony. He was throwing large black plastic bags into the water, not gently lowering them, throwing them. After each toss, he paused, watching, as if waiting for something to happen, or making sure it didn't. The fisherman watched longer than he should have. Eventually, their eyes met. It lasted only a second, but the man on the embankment reacted immediately. He stiffened, turned sharply, walked quickly toward a nearby vehicle. According to the fisherman, it was black. The man entered the car in a hurry, nearly stumbling, and drove off. The bags remained. When investigators later asked the fisherman about the vehicle's color, he hesitated. Midday sunlight can distort perception. Dark gray can appear black. Deep red can appear black. Even navy blue can appear black under glare. But one detail remains certain. The man did not want to be seen. Standing by the quiet water days later, investigators understood something unsettling. This was not a random act of violence. Forensic analysis soon confirmed the victim was female. Approximately 45 to 48 years old, around 160 centimeters tall, Cause of death, strangulation. There were no signs of sexual assault, no jewelry, no distinctive tattoos, no identifying scars. And without the hands, fingerprint identification was impossible, a precaution often seen in crime films. But this was not a film. What troubled investigators most was not the dismemberment, it was the silence. Missing persons alerts were distributed across the city, physical descriptors released, age range, height, even a small mole near the left eye reconstructed from remaining tissue. No one came forward. No frantic husband, no searching sister, no employer reporting absence. A woman in her late 40s had vanished, and no one appeared to notice. Weeks passed, then months. The case slowly slipped from headlines into investigative limbo. But inside the task force, it did not fade. Because in cases involving dismemberment, statistics are consistent. The perpetrator almost always knows the victim. This was not an opportunistic killing. It happened in private. There was time, there was space, there was planning. Someone had strangled her. Someone had carefully separated her body. Someone had transported 5 bags to the river during a crowded public festival. And someone had left one behind. At that point, investigators did not yet know her name. But they were certain of one thing. Whoever placed those bags into the Hutuo River believed he had erased a person. What he had actually created was a pattern. And patterns have a way of resurfacing. In the forensic laboratory, the woman had no name. She was assigned a number, a case code, a set of measurements written in black ink across a whiteboard. Female, estimated age 45 to 48, height approximately 160 centimeters, cause of death, manual strangulation. The bruising around the neck was pronounced. The cartilage in the larynx showed compression damage. There were no defensive wounds significant enough to suggest a prolonged struggle, which meant one of two things. She had been overpowered quickly, or she had trusted the person standing close enough to place hands around her throat. The missing hands complicated identification. Without fingerprints, the fastest method of comparison was gone. Dental records were limited. DNA would take time and required a reference sample from a relative. But no relative had reported her missing. That silence became the loudest clue in the room. In most homicide investigations, the timeline begins with absence. A missed phone call, an empty bed, a co-worker asking why someone failed to show up. Here, there was nothing. No missing person report filed in Shijiazhuang. No inquiries from neighboring districts. No anxious family members walking into police stations with photographs. It was as if she had dissolved before she died. Investigators began building a profile from fragments. The dismemberment was methodical. Clean separations at joints, not chaotic hacking. Whoever did this had either anatomical familiarity or had taken deliberate time to study where to cut. This was not the behavior of someone panicking in the aftermath of an accidental death. It suggested calculation. Strangulation itself is intimate. It requires proximity, sustained pressure, eye contact often. It is not a distant act. Statistically, strangulation overwhelmingly indicates personal connection, a partner, an ex-partner, someone emotionally invested, and yet no one was looking for her. That contradiction gnawed at the task force. If she had no close family, perhaps she lived alone. If she lived alone, perhaps her absence would not immediately alarm anyone. But even then, employers notice, neighbors notice, utility bills accumulate, messages go unanswered, unless someone was answering them. The possibility emerged quietly in internal discussions. What if the reason no one reported her missing was because someone was actively maintaining the illusion that she was still alive? The idea shifted the investigation from the river to the digital. Phone records were requested for unidentified female devices active near the river corridor in the days before April 21st. It was a wide net, too wide. Meanwhile, investigators returned to the fisherman's testimony. A middle-aged man, roughly 1.75 meters tall, average build, driving what appeared to be a black vehicle. Traffic cameras near the river entrance were reviewed between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. on April 21st. More than 100 dark-colored vehicles passed through. Each owner was contacted, each alibi examined. For a brief period, momentum surged. One coal businessman fit the height description, His property contained large cutting tools and a thick wooden board. Suspicion intensified. Forensic testing, however, revealed no biological trace linking him to the remains. He was eliminated. The investigation exhaled and then stalled. Weeks turned into a month. The woman remained unidentified. Inside the task force meetings, a different question began circulating. If the killer removed her hands to prevent identification, that suggests prior knowledge of forensic procedure. If he dismembered the body carefully, that suggests time and privacy. If he transported the remains during a public festival, that suggests strategic camouflage. This was not random violence. This was someone who believed he could outthink the process. Yet the incomplete disposal told another story. Only 5 bags reached the river. Divers confirmed there were no additional remains nearby. So where was the 6th bag? Had the killer panicked when seen? Had he kept part of her? Or had he needed those missing pieces for something else? The psychological tone of the case shifted. Initially, it was shock. Body parts in a river. Now it was absence. Who was she? What kind of life leaves no immediate trace when it ends? Investigators reconstructed her likely daily routine based on age bracket and urban demographics. Mid-40s to late 40s women in this region commonly work in administrative roles, manage small businesses, care for aging parents, support adult children. It was statistically unlikely that no one would notice her disappearance for long, unless the timeline of death did not match the timeline of discovery. Forensic estimates placed her time of death around the evening of April 20th. But what if digitally she continued existing after that date? That possibility reframed everything. Phone metadata analysis intensified. Bank activity for unclaimed female profiles within the age range was flagged. Then another unsettling detail emerged from lab analysis. The apartment where the dismemberment likely occurred had not yet been found. But based on drainage patterns and cut marks, investigators theorized it was done in a private indoor bathroom with washable surfaces. That meant there was a controlled environment, running water, time to clean, time to bag, time to plan transportation, and no one interrupted until the river. The image returned repeatedly during internal briefings. A man standing on the embankment during a ritual of mercy, throwing black plastic bags into the same water where others released animals for symbolic life. He paused after each throw, waiting, watching. When their eyes met, something shifted. That moment, brief eye contact, may have prevented the final bag from entering the river, which meant somewhere in the city there was still a missing section of a body, and possibly another crime scene. As April turned into May, pressure mounted. Media attention faded, but internally, frustration deepened. An unnamed victim limits narrative momentum. Without identity, there is no relational map. Without relational map, there is no suspect hierarchy. The team understood something crucial. This case would not be solved by the river. It would be solved by silence. Because somewhere, someone was not asking questions. And that absence of concern was not natural. It was engineered. By early May, the investigation had narrowed to a single fragile thread. A man, a riverbank, a dark-colored car. It wasn't much, but it was something. Traffic surveillance around the access road near the Hutuo River was reviewed frame by frame. Between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., on April 21st, the estimated window when the black plastic bags were thrown, over 100 vehicles matching a dark description passed through. Black sedans, dark gray SUVs, deep blue compacts. Under midday glare, color became unreliable. Investigators made a decision. They would check every single one. Vehicle owners were contacted and interviewed. Movements were reconstructed. GPS logs, toll booth records, mobile phone tower pings, each examined for contradiction. For a brief period, one name surfaced repeatedly: Chen Ming, 41 years old, coal business operator. He stood approximately 1.75 meters tall, consistent with the fisherman's estimate. His financial records showed recent instability. His business had suffered losses. He had access to industrial cutting tools stored at a secondary property on the outskirts of the city. When officers visited that property, they found a large cleaver, a thick wooden chopping board, an otherwise sparse interior. The optics were unsettling. No kitchen setup. No clear culinary purpose. Just tools capable of cutting through bone. Speculation inside the task force intensified. Motive possibility, financial desperation, physical capability, present. Geographic proximity, confirmed. For 48 hours, it felt as though the case had found direction. Forensic teams collected swabs from the cleaver handle, the chopping board surface, drainage pipes, floor seams. Luminol was applied in the dim interior. They waited. When the results returned, the atmosphere shifted again. Negative. No blood traces matching the unidentified woman, no DNA linkage, no biological residue suggesting recent dismemberment. Chen Ming provided verifiable alibis for the relevant time window. He had attended the animal release ceremony with his wife and 2 friends. Photographs existed. Phone location, data aligned. He was eliminated. Momentum collapsed. Inside the briefing room, a quiet realization settled. Eyewitness testimony, especially regarding vehicle color, is notoriously unreliable under stress and glare conditions. The fisherman had observed from over 100 meters away at midday during a crowded event. The car might not have been black. It might not even have been dark. Investigators widened the search parameters. Instead of filtering by color, they analyzed behavior. Which vehicles? Entered the river access road briefly and exited quickly? Returned multiple times within a short window? Accelerated unusually upon departure? Patterns began to matter more than pigment. Among the hundreds of entries logged on April 20th and 21st, one vehicle drew subtle attention. White. It had passed the river access area multiple times on April 20th. The estimated date of death. Not long visits, not extended stops, but repeated passes as if surveying. On April 21st at 12:40 p.m., roughly matching the fisherman's timeline, the same white vehicle exited the area at a speed slightly above average traffic flow. Nothing overtly suspicious, just slightly faster. Investigators hesitated. White did not match the witness statement, but human memory compresses color into contrast, especially when recalling stressful encounters. The owner of the white vehicle was identified. Dong Wen, 41 years old, formerly engaged in coal trading, recent financial strain, height approximately 1.75 meters. The overlap was subtle, not conclusive, but enough to justify a preliminary background review. Dong Wen had no major violent criminal history, no prior homicide charges, no public incidents suggesting escalating aggression, but his financial profile told a different story. Debt accumulation over the previous year, unstable cash flow, attempts at short-term capital recovery. Investigators requested expanded financial activity monitoring. At this stage, however, there was still no victim identity, and without identity, linking Dong Wen to the deceased woman was speculative. The team faced a familiar investigative paradox. They might have a suspect, but they didn't yet know who he would have killed. The white car lead was not strong enough for direct confrontation. Instead, they continued cross-referencing mobile phone location data near the river corridor. Dong Wen's device pinged near the area on April 20th evening. That alone meant little. The corridor was accessible and public. On April 21st, around noon, his device again registered within range of the river-adjacent towers. That meant something slightly more. Still circumstantial, still fragile. Investigators debated internally. Was this confirmation bias forming after the collapse of the black vehicle lead? Or was the white car simply overlooked because of a cognitive fixation on the word black? Weeks passed with incremental data, but no breakthrough. The unidentified woman remained unnamed. The white vehicle remained interesting but unproven, and the river yielded nothing further. It was at this stage, when the task force began feeling the slow fatigue of stagnation, that the case shifted direction. Not because of a new forensic test, not because of a surveillance breakthrough, but because of intuition. Roughly 30 kilometers away, 2 women stood in front of a small convenience store, staring at a reconstruction image posted beside the entrance. One of them leaned closer and said quietly, "She looks like someone I know." That sentence would do more for the investigation than 100 vehicle checks, because until that moment, the woman in the river had no name. And once she had one, the entire architecture of suspicion would rearrange itself. The case did not break because of technology. It broke because something felt wrong. Nearly a month after the remains were discovered in the Hutuo River, a woman walked into a local police station holding a folded flyer. She had seen the reconstruction image posted near a convenience store outside Shijiazhuang. The age range matched. The facial structure was close. But what unsettled her wasn't the image alone. It was the silence. Her older sister, Wang He, 47 years old, had not answered a call in weeks. At first, that hadn't seemed unusual. They lived apart. Both were busy. Communication was often limited to short messages. But when their father was hospitalized unexpectedly, something shifted. She called her sister. The phone rang. No answer. Minutes later, a text arrived. "I'm busy. I can't come back." The message was brief. Too brief. Wang He had always been the first to return home when family needed her. Even during previous illnesses, she had rearranged her schedule immediately. This time, no call, only text. That detail lingered. The sister tried again, days later. Again, only messages, never a voice, never a call back. Eventually, she traveled to Wang He's apartment. It was locked. Neighbors hadn't seen her in months. They assumed she had gone elsewhere. Nothing unusual. No loud disturbances remembered. The police obtained authorization to enter. What they found was not chaos. It was cleanliness. The floors were spotless, surfaces wiped, bathroom tiles unusually polished. Too polished. Forensic teams applied luminol inside the bathroom. The chemical reaction revealed faint streaks invisible to the naked eye. Blood. Not splatter consistent with stabbing. More like pooling and wash patterns. DNA samples were collected. When results returned, the match confirmed it. The unidentified woman from the river now had a name. Wang He, 47 years old, divorced, living with her 22-year-old son. The moment identity was established, the investigation transformed. Now there was a relational network. Now there were financial records. Now there was motive terrain. Investigators expanded financial analysis immediately. What they discovered added a new dimension. Wang He maintained an active stock trading account. At one point, its value had exceeded 10 million RMB, over 1.5 million USD equivalent at the time. Her lifestyle did not reflect extreme wealth. She lived modestly, quietly, no display of affluence, but liquid assets changed risk profiles. Then came the transaction that shifted the case from homicide to something colder. Approximately 1 month after her estimated time of death, 1.8 million RMB was transferred out of her account. Not withdrawn in small increments, not hacked digitally, transferred deliberately to an individual named Dong Wen. The same Dong Wen associated with the white vehicle observed near the river. The same Dong Wen whose phone pinged in the area on April 20th and 21st. The timing was critical. If Wang He died on April 20th, who authorized the transfer a month later? Further analysis revealed additional activity. Her vehicle, a black sedan, had been sold below market value shortly after her disappearance. Approximately 80,000 RMB was withdrawn in cash. Someone had access, and that someone was not panicking. He waited weeks, allowed time to pass, allowed public attention to fade, then began extracting value. Investigators located Dong Wen for questioning. He admitted knowing Wang He. They had met through stock investment circles months earlier. Both divorced, both middle-aged. He described their relationship as serious. He expressed interest in marriage. She, according to him, was hesitant. Their communication history showed increasing tension in the weeks leading up to April 20th. Repeated messages about commitment, about future planning, about formalizing the relationship. Dong Wen insisted that on the night of April 20th, they argued. He claimed he left the apartment angry but unharmed. He denied violence, denied knowledge of her disappearance. When asked about the 1.8 million RMB transfer, he stated it was voluntary, repayment for investment guidance. The explanation did not align with the digital timeline. Login credentials had been accessed from a device consistent with his location. Investigators requested deeper device forensics. While that analysis was pending, another detail emerged from the apartment. Inside a bedroom drawer beneath clothing, Forensic technicians discovered additional blood traces. DNA testing confirmed the blood belonged not to Wang He, but to her son, Pan Xiaoliang, 22 years old. At that moment, the case expanded. This was no longer a single victim homicide. Pan Xiaoliang had not been seen for weeks either. His phone was inactive. Neighbors assumed he had moved. No formal missing person report had been filed. 2 people had vanished from the same apartment. 1 body partially recovered. The other, not yet found. The pattern began clarifying. Strangulation, dismemberment, river disposal, financial extraction, and now evidence suggesting a second victim inside the home. Investigators reevaluated the earlier detail that had troubled them since the beginning. There were supposed to be 6 bags. Only 5 reached the river. Where was the 6th? If Pan Xiaoliang's blood was in the apartment, was the missing bag connected to him? Dongwen was brought in again. This time the questioning shifted tone. Not accusatory, precise, calm. They laid out the financial records, the login metadata, the vehicle movement timeline, the DNA from the bathroom, the blood in the drawer, the white vehicle's repeated passes on April 20th. Then they asked one question: what happened after she said no? Silence behaves differently in interrogation rooms. It compresses. Dongwen initially maintained composure, but composure is harder to sustain when evidence accumulates in layers rather than strikes and bursts. He eventually acknowledged the argument. He acknowledged being present late into the evening. He acknowledged physical contact, but he still framed it as accidental. Loss of control, momentary escalation. Investigators listened and waited, because the real fracture point would not be the first death, it would be the second. The forensic and financial threads had converged. What began at the river had moved into a relationship. What seemed like panic disposal now appeared structured. What looked like concealment now resembled preservation. And Dongwen had one problem he could not talk his way around. If Wang He died in a moment of rage, why did money move a month later? Why was her son's blood inside the home? And why was one bag never thrown into the river? The answers to those questions would redefine the entire case. Interrogations rarely collapse in dramatic fashion. They erode. Dongwen did not confess immediately. He adjusted his narrative in increments. First, it was a disagreement. Then it became a heated argument. Then physical contact. Eventually, the sequence stabilized. On the evening of April 20th, inside Wang He's apartment in Shijiazhuang, the discussion turned, once again, to marriage. They had met months earlier through stock trading circles. Both divorced, both approaching middle age. For Dongwen, time felt compressed. Stability felt urgent. For Wang He, caution felt necessary. She wanted more time. He wanted certainty. Digital messages recovered from prior weeks showed a pattern. Pressure, reconciliation, renewed pressure. He frequently framed commitment as proof of loyalty. She consistently responded with delay, not rejection, but hesitation. That night, hesitation was interpreted as refusal. According to Dongwen's statement, their voices rose. He accused her of wasting his time. She stood firm. The conversation reached the familiar edge of emotional stalemate. Then proximity shifted. He moved closer, hands raised. Initially to push, he claimed. But once contact was made, something changed. Strangulation is not instantaneous. It requires sustained pressure. It demands physical closeness. It forces the aggressor to remain engaged. He tightened his grip. She struggled briefly, then less, then not at all. In the interrogation room, Dongwen described the moment as losing control. Investigators observed something else. Control did not disappear that night. It evolved. After confirming she was no longer breathing, he did not flee. He did not call emergency services. He did not surrender. He sat. He thought. He evaluated consequences. That transition from emotional escalation to logistical planning marked the true nature of the crime. He dragged her body into the bathroom. He retrieved cutting tools from within the apartment. He began dismemberment. Forensic analysis later confirmed joints were separated deliberately. Not frenzied hacking, but anatomical division. He divided the remains into 6 black plastic bags, balancing approximate weight between them. 6. The number was practical, not symbolic, manageable loads, easier to transport discreetly. He waited until midday on April 21st, during the animal release ceremony near the Hutuo River. Crowds provide camouflage. Movement becomes invisible when everyone is moving. He loaded the bags into Wang He's black sedan. He drove to the river access point. He threw the first bag, then the second, then the third. After each toss, he paused, watching, ensuring submersion. By the time he reached the fifth bag, the fishermen downstream had noticed. Their eyes met. That single moment disrupted the plan. Fear does not always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like recalculation. Dongwen did not throw the sixth bag. He returned it to the vehicle. He left. Back in the car, he faced a new problem. Wang He's son, Pan Xiaoliang, 22 years old, living in the same apartment. If his mother vanished, he would ask questions. If he saw signs of disturbance, he would report it. Dongwen later stated that he initially hoped Pan would not return that night. But hope is not strategy. He contacted an acquaintance, Liu Jun. He did not disclose every detail at first, but he made an offer, 45,000 RMB, in exchange for assistance. That night, the two men waited inside the apartment. When Pan Xiaoliang entered, the confrontation was swift. He was overpowered before he fully understood what was happening. Unlike his mother's death, this was not described as accidental loss of control. It was preventive, calculated. The second killing did not stem from emotional injury. It stemmed from risk management. The sixth bag now had purpose. Both Pan Xiaoliang's body and the remaining portion of Wang He's remains were transported to a rural area outside the city. They were buried in shallow ground. No river, no ceremony, just soil. From that point forward, Dongwen's actions were consistent with preservation of advantage. He waited approximately 1 month. Then he accessed Wang He's financial accounts. 1.8 million RMB transferred. Additional cash withdrawals. The sale of her vehicle. He believed time had diluted suspicion. He believed the river had erased identity. He believed digital silence could substitute for physical presence. Psychological evaluation later categorized Dongwen not as impulsively violent by history, but as control-oriented. The rejection of marriage did not merely disappoint him. It destabilized his perceived future. In individuals with fragile ego structures tied to relational validation, refusal can be interpreted as existential threat. If I cannot secure this, becomes I am losing. Strangulation restored dominance in the immediate moment. Dismemberment restored order. The second murder restored security. Financial extraction restored compensation. Each step was sequential, not chaotic. The presence of an accomplice further dissolved any claim of uncontrollable rage. Rage does not negotiate payment. Rage does not recruit assistance. Rage does not wait 30 days before transferring funds. By late 2016, the convergence of financial forensics, digital metadata, DNA evidence, and confession formed a cohesive narrative. Dongwen was arrested, Liu Jun was arrested, the burial site was located, the sixth bag was no longer theoretical. In March 2017, the court delivered its verdict. Dongwen received a death sentence with a 2-year reprieve under Chinese criminal law, a conditional suspension that may convert to life imprisonment pending conduct. Liu Jun received life imprisonment. 2 lives ended, one because she asked for time, one because he might have asked questions. The river that once carried plastic bags from a ceremony of mercy had briefly concealed evidence of something far less symbolic. But concealment failed, because what Dongwen underestimated was not surveillance, it was pattern. Violence rooted in control leaves patterns, and patterns surface. When the verdict was read in March 2017, the courtroom was quiet. There were no dramatic outbursts, no visible collapse, just procedure. Dongwen was sentenced to death with a 2-year reprieve under Chinese criminal law, a suspended execution that may later be commuted to life imprisonment depending on conduct. Liu Jun received life imprisonment. 2 defendants, 2 convictions, 2 graves. From a legal standpoint, the case was closed. From a psychological standpoint, it was not. Because what unfolded in that apartment in April 2016 was not the eruption of a visibly violent man with a documented history of brutality. It was something more subtle. Dongwen did not fit the stereotype of a career criminal. He was not publicly aggressive. He had no established pattern of violent offenses. He entered Wang He's life through a socially acceptable channel. Investment circles, shared financial interests, shared stage of life. Both divorced, both middle-aged. On paper, their relationship looked ordinary. That is what makes this case unsettling. In many intimate partner homicides, warning signs are loud. Threats, stalking, prior assault reports. Here the pattern was quieter. Repeated pressure to formalize commitment. Repeated framing of marriage as proof of loyalty. Repeated cycles of tension, apology, reconciliation. In behavioral psychology, this pattern resembles coercive control escalation. Not overt dominance at first, gradual narrowing of emotional space, language that shifts responsibility onto the partner. If you really cared, if you respected me, if we're serious. Over time, these statements become tests. Each delay becomes perceived rejection. Each rejection becomes perceived humiliation. For individuals whose identity is anchored in control and validation, ambiguity feels intolerable. When Wang He said she needed more time, she was exercising caution. When Dongwen heard it, he interpreted instability. The strangulation itself was personal, but what followed revealed the deeper structure. Dismemberment is labor-intensive. It requires compartmentalization. Recruiting an accomplice for the second killing required planning. Waiting a month before transferring 1.8 million RMB required patience. None of those behaviors reflect emotional collapse alone. They reflect preservation of advantage. There is a concept in forensic psychology sometimes summarized as, if I cannot secure ownership, I will eliminate uncertainty. In this case, uncertainty took the form of refusal, and then it took the form of a potential witness. The second killing, Pan Jiaoliang, is what reframed the entire narrative. If Wang He's death could be argued as rage, however flawed that claim, the killing of her son could not. It was preventative, transactional, 45,000 RMB for silence. The financial component also complicates motive analysis. Was this about rejection or money? The evidence suggests both. Emotional destabilization initiated the violence. Financial gain extended it. Once the first boundary was crossed, the rest became logistical. Another dimension of this case lies in social context. Mid-2010s urban China saw significant growth in retail stock trading participation. Middle-aged individuals sought financial independence through investment markets. Wealth accumulation, even quietly, altered relationship dynamics. Wang He's account once exceeded 10 million RMB. That figure is not trivial. Financial asymmetry inside romantic relationships can generate tension, especially when one party is experiencing business losses. Control can become intertwined with economic security. Yet outwardly, there were no dramatic signals, no public threats, no emergency calls, just pressure. Then silence. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the case is not the 5 bags recovered from the Hutuo River. It is the digital silence that followed. Text messages sent after death, accounts accessed, life simulated. For weeks, Wang He appeared present through short replies. In modern investigations, physical disappearance does not always equal immediate absence. Digital footprints can be manipulated, which raises an unsettling question. How many people remain visible online long after something irreversible has happened offline? The case also highlights another recurring pattern in intimate homicides: the inability to accept not yet. Rejection does not always sound dramatic. Sometimes it is simply, I need more time. In healthy relationships, time is negotiable. In control-based dynamics, delay is threat. When the trial concluded, legal closure was achieved. But the broader question lingers. How early could this escalation have been recognized? Were there warning signs visible to friends? Did pressure feel like persistence rather than coercion? Would the crime have been uncovered without the sister's intuition? If she had accepted the text messages at face value, how long would the silence have continued? 2 lives were lost in an apartment that neighbors described as quiet. The river revealed the violence, but it was doubt, small, personal doubt, that solved it. And perhaps that is where the case leaves us. Not with spectacle, not with shock, but with a quieter reflection. When does commitment become control? When does insistence become coercion? And when someone says they need time, is that a boundary to respect or a trigger for something darker? Do you believe this began as emotional collapse or calculated opportunity? Share your thoughts below.